After I died, Serpent also contracted an incurable disease. He drew up a will in advance and held a live stream in front of others to mourn his late wife. Behind the scenes, however, he was entangled with the woman who had an affair during their marriage, allowing her to mistreat our biological daughter in various ways. Even after the will was announced, he left 80 of his estate to his illegitimate son and only 20 to his daughter. On the day the court ruled that the distribution of the estate was correct, my soul trembled with anger. A white light flashed suddenly. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the day I died in a car accident. I don't know if it's because I still had an obsession after death. Even though I had been dead for nearly 3 months, my soul still lingered in the house where I had lived before my death, just when I thought I would remain a wandering spirit like this. My husband, Serpent, came back here. He stared quietly at our wedding photo covered with a white cloth. As if using all his strength, he tore it off. Finally, having to fob my sorry, he turned on the live stream and began to express his longing for me. He told the netizens about how we met, fell in love, and finally got married. The number of viewers in the live stream room increased from single digits to 4 digits in just a few hours. Netizens were moved to tears one after another. I was heartbroken to hear it. And he also cried until his eyes were red. Before the live stream ended, he said, "Fortunately, it was her that God took away first. Not me. Otherwise, how sad my beloved would be. But I was just as miserable after I died. We had just been married for 7 years. And our daughter was only 5 years old." He successfully obtained the professorship, paid off the mortgage in advance. And my career was at its peak. Clearly, everything was just starting to get better. But it all came to an abrupt end because of my car accident. As he spoke, he choked up and couldn't cry anymore. Finally, having to fob my sorry, he wiped away his tears, took a deep breath, and put on a smile again. He said, "It doesn't matter now because I also have cancer. The doctor said I can live for at most 3 more months. I want to use the limited time to record my love for her. If there really are souls in this world, isn't death a way for us to be reunited?" I was shocked inside. He also had cancer? And he only had 3 months left? After Serpent ended the live stream, he wiped his glasses. Then he began to count the rewards received in the background. After the platform took its share, there was still a 5-digit amount left from one live stream. Seeing this number, Serpent smiled and said, "That's great. If I keep doing live streams like this, even if I'm no longer in this world in 3 months, our child will be taken care of." I couldn't help but feel sad again. Serpent loved me so much. And he loved our daughter so much. Even though he only had 3 months left in his life, he was still making plans for his daughter. At this moment, the door was knocked. Serpent put his phone in his pocket and went to open the door. Standing at the door first was his student, Venom, holding a baby in her arms. When she saw him, Venom turned her body and introduced the young man standing behind her. "Serpent, this is Lawyer Wang. He's here today to help with drawing up the will." Serpent nodded. And the two of them then entered the house. Lawyer Wang took out a stack of documents from his briefcase and placed them on the table. "The will has been drawn up according to your wishes. 80 of all your assets, including the accidental insurance compensation for our aura, as well as the funds, stocks, and even the real estate, will be inherited by your son with Venom. And the remaining 20 will be inherited by your daughter." My head buzzed, and my throat felt blocked. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. His son with Venom? Moreover, the daughter would only get 20 of the estate? As if to prove what he had just said, Serpent turned his gentle gaze to Venom and then took the baby from her arms. He then gently kissed the baby on the face. "Besides, before my life ends, all the income from the live streams will be given 100 to the person I love the most. Venom, Patty, and our son." My soul couldn't stop trembling. A dull pain came from my chest again. If a soul could be angered to death, I think I would definitely die again now. Probably out of anger. I rushed towards Serpent again and again. But I was just a soul. Even if I rushed towards him countless times, I could only pass through his body unharmed. How could they do this? "Serpent, who kept saying he loved me. How could he do this? Serpent and I met during our university days. At that time, both of us came from rural areas. The difference was that my family was poor. I not only relied on student loans to go to university but also earned my living expenses by doing part-time jobs on weekends. With very little money in my pocket, I had to live on steamed buns in many cases. Serpent saw this embarrassing situation, and he divided the dishes in his bowl in half and gave them to me. He just said that he had a bad stomach and couldn't finish so much food. For a big man over 1.8 meters tall, it was impossible to say that he couldn't finish such a small amount of food. I knew he said that on purpose to take care of me. After silently accepting his kindness, we gradually got together. Later, he graduated from university, stayed on as a teaching assistant while pursuing his postgraduate studies, and I entered society early and started working hard. In this way, he went from being a postgraduate to a doctor and then became a university teacher and successfully obtained a professorship. I also climbed the corporate ladder and eventually became a senior executive. As for Venom, I met her by chance. The first time I saw her, I seemed to see myself in the past. She was strong, stubborn, hadn't fulfilled my obsession, and her eyes were full of hope for the future. At that time, she was crying helplessly at the school gate because she didn't have enough money to pay her tuition fees. After learning the ins and outs of the matter, I decided to sponsor her to go to school. Unexpectedly, the girl I sponsored for a full 4 years eventually became the mistress who destroyed my family. After I died, she colluded with Serpent and exploited me. At this moment, the door was gently knocked again. The door opened, and my thin and small daughter stood at the door. After not seeing her for half a year, my daughter, who used to have a little baby fat, was now as thin as a stick. Moreover, the clothes she was wearing were dirty and torn. When Serpent saw his daughter, he said impatiently, "Why did you come here alone?" The daughter said timidly, "Dad, I miss Mom." I couldn't help but rush forward again. "Dawn, Mom misses you too." But before my body could get close, my daughter was roughly dragged into the bathroom by Venom. Afraid that something would happen to my daughter, I floated in after her. I saw Venom slap my daughter hard on the face. "What are you thinking about? Your mom is dead, so stop thinking about her. Listen up. From now on, you're not allowed to mention your mom again. Otherwise, I'll make you pay." After she finished speaking, she pushed my daughter hard to the ground. My daughter fell to the ground but didn't dare to cry out. She just covered her mouth and sobbed, looking extremely frightened. When Venom pushed my daughter down, I even saw her bare back, which was covered with bruises of different colors. But Venom still didn't let it go. She glanced at the window behind the toilet and said with a smile, "Don't you miss your ma? Aunt I will tell you a way. As long as you jump out of here, you can see your mom." The anger in my heart surged to the extreme again. I rushed up to stop her and wanted to tear Venom's face apart. But it was still useless. I could only watch helplessly as my daughter, while sobbing, stepped on the toilet lid with her small legs and climbed towards the window little by little. "No. Dawn. You can't go up." The moment I rushed towards my daughter, a white light flashed suddenly, and I was enveloped in a white light. Then I heard the familiar noisy sounds. "Sister-in-law. Your daughter-in-law is really nice. She's good-looking and can make money. You're so lucky." Before the dazzling white light dissipated, I heard my mother-in-law's voice, which was like a duck's quack. "Lucky? I think that for a woman, it's better to focus on the family. What's the use of showing up outside all day long and earning that little money? It's embarrassing." This time, when the white light dissipated, I finally saw clearly. The person speaking was indeed my mother-in-law. At this moment, as she spoke, she glared at me with her eyes, not hiding her disgust for me at all. "Wait a minute, she's glaring at me." Realizing this, I carefully looked around. The home was still the same home, no longer the empty house after I died. On the dining table in the living room, there was a huge 3-layer cake. The candles on the top were arranged in the shape of 60. My mother-in-law sat on the chair, spitting as she criticized me. And my husband, Serpent, whom everyone said loved me dearly, seemed to hear nothing. He was even looking at another woman who had a big belly. I remembered. This was my mother-in-law's 60th birthday. And I had been reborn. The ridiculous thing was that on this day in my last life, there were clearly many signs. But I turned a blind eye to them. I didn't have time to think too much. My gaze swept across the crowd, trying to find my daughter. I was afraid that something would happen to her. Unexpectedly. My mother-in-law blocked in front of me at this moment and pushed me on the chest with one hand. "Didn't you say you prepared a gift for me just now? Where is the gift? Where is it?" I withdrew my gaze and looked at my mother-in-law, who had a face full of fat and was looking at me coldly. "What did you just say?" My mother-in-law gave me a white look and said. I said. "Didn't you just?" I interrupted her. "Not this sentence. The previous one. I remember. You said that I show up outside all day long. And earning money is useless and embarrassing." When my mother-in-law heard this, her face turned pale. "Did I say something wrong? Look at others. Which one of them isn't a good wife and a loving mother? They just find a decent job and spend the rest of the time taking care of their husbands and children and serving their parents-in-law. Look at you." I sneered and looked at the people around. In my last life, my mother-in-law mocked me in public more than once. She said I was assertive, delicate, and didn't do housework. I didn't even look like a woman. She even told everyone that I was a hen that couldn't lay eggs and couldn't give birth to a son. My unhappy original family made me desperately want to hold on to Serpent, who was the only one who treated me well. Even though I had a successful career, not only did I tolerate her everywhere, but I also believed Serpent's words. He said that my mother-in-law came from the countryside, didn't know many characters, and had a sharp tongue but a kind heart. Now it seems that both my mother-in-law and Serpent were talking nonsense. And this time, I didn't plan to tolerate it anymore. So I looked at my mother-in-law and said, "So, have you finished talking nonsense? If you have, it's my turn to speak. To put it bluntly, your son is just an ordinary university professor. His salary can't even pay off the mortgage. You come from the countryside and have no pension. If I hadn't gone out and embarrassed myself, our whole family would have starved. Now, you're enjoying what I earn and use it. But you say that my earning money is useless. Since it's useless, there's no need to give these to you anymore. After all, it's embarrassing." I took out the big gold bracelet and 2 stacks of cash that I had prepared in my bag, showed them, and put them back. My mother-in-law stared so intently that her eyes seemed to be fixed, and she opened her mouth slightly. "No, that's not what I meant." Probably seeing that I didn't pay attention to her and had also put away all the money and the big gold bracelet, my mother-in-law turned her pleading gaze to Serpent. Serpent's face turned red and then white. He frowned and walked up to me, lowering his voice and saying, "Aurora, what's wrong with you today? It's Mom's birthday. Do you have to say such harsh words? Go and apologize to Mom. And I'll pretend that nothing happened." After he finished speaking, Venom also stepped forward and said, "Yeah, Sister Aurora. Just apologize to Auntie. She's old, and her words might be a bit unpleasant. But she's still an elder after all." With just a glance, the image of her discussing with Serpent how to divide the inheritance once again flashed before my eyes. What I had seen and heard in my previous life made me clench my fists involuntarily. This person, whom I sponsored to go to school, later hooked up with Serpent, lived in my house, spent my money, and even abused my daughter. What right did she have to criticize me? Counting the days. The baby in Venom's belly would be due in 3 months. I slapped her hard across the face. "This is our family matter. Why are you, an outsider, butting in?" With that slap, Serpent, who had been pretending so well, instantly lost his composure. He strode forward, shielding Venom behind him, and grabbed my wrist, gritting his teeth and saying, "Aurora, Venom is pregnant. She was just trying to offer some kind advice. And you hit her. What on earth are you going crazy about?" I burst into laughter again, and then pulled my hand out of Serpent's grip. "Why are you so nervous? People who don't know might think she's someone special to you. Besides, Venom is a child I sponsored. To her, I'm like a second parent. She said something wrong. And as her mother, it's only right for me to teach her a lesson and give her a slap. Is there a problem with that? Serpent pursed his lips, looking a bit embarrassed. He looked at me and then at Venom, who had been slapped. Venom's eyes turned red, and tears welled up in her eyes. But she still forced a smile and said, Sister Aurora's right. She's like a second parent to me. It doesn't matter if she slaps me. I don't feel the pain. When Venom said the last sentence, she lowered her head. But the resentment in her eyes was fully revealed the moment she lowered her head. I felt a hint of satisfaction and said, Good that you understand. Venom. Serpent. There are even more interesting scenes waiting for you later. I'm not sure if he realized something, but Serpent's expressions oftened a lot. He said in a low voice, I don't mean anything else. I just think that Venom is already a grown girl. And it's a bit inappropriate for you to do this in front of so many people. Upon hearing this, Venom's eyes became even redder. She tried hard to force a smile and said, Serpent. I'm really okay. I just remembered that I have something to do today. So I'll go back first. She took out a jewelry box from her bag. When the box was opened, there was a gold necklace inside. Auntie. I saved up money from my part-time job to buy this. It's not expensive. I hope you don't mind. The item clearly didn't look cheap. It was a fairly thick gold chain with a matriabud made of pure gold hanging from it. It wasn't something that a poor student like her could save up for just by doing part-time jobs. Most importantly, I had seen this necklace in Serpent's cloakroom. In my previous life, I was busy cooking in the kitchen and didn't notice who gave it to my mother-in-law. So I assumed it was from Serpent. Now that I thought about it, it turned out that Serpent used it to help Venom curry favor with his mother. Sure enough, as soon as my mother-in-law took the jewelry box, she started speaking in a sarcastic tone. While praising it, she gave me a sidelong glance and said, Our Venom is so sensible. Unlike some people, who can't stand being said a few words. I was just about to retort when I saw my daughter rubbing her eyes and walking out of the room. At this moment, I couldn't care about anything else. I took a big step forward and hugged my daughter tightly in my arms. Dawn. Thinking of the torture my daughter had endured after my death, I couldn't help but burst into tears. My daughter let me hug her tightly and reached out her little hand to pat my back. Calling out softly, Mom, I wiped away my tears. Responded. And quickly composed myself. And I took my daughter's hand and prepared to leave. But at this moment, Serpent called out to me, Are you going out? There's no red wine at home. You can just go out and buy a bottle. My mother-in-law also grabbed Venom's hand at this time and said, Go after we finish eating. Even if you have something to do, it's not urgent. After all, food is the most important thing in the world. I stared quietly at the man in front of me. His gentle and refined appearance, compared with the features of him fooling around with Venom in my previous life, made me have an impulse to tear him apart for a moment. But at this moment, my daughter suddenly rushed up, hugged my leg, and raised her little face, saying, Mom, can you stay and play with me? Looking at my daughter, I thought carefully. In my previous life, it was exactly at this juncture that Serpent also used the excuse that there was no red wine at home and asked me to go out and buy some. And it was on my way to buy red wine that I had a car accident. Could it be that like car accident was deliberately arranged by him? Thinking of this, I said inferently, I'm not good at choosing. Why don't you go? Just when I thought Serpent would refuse, he actually agreed. Sure. That just as Serpent was about to go out, Venom stopped him. Serpent. Today is Auntie's birthday. You should stay at home and accompany Auntie. I'll go and buy it instead. Serpent nodded, all right. After Venom left, I carefully examined Serpent's face. However, even though I tried hard to find a flaw in his expression, the man in front of me still acted flawlessly. I don't know if Serpent had anything to do with the car accident, but Venom must be involved. Noticing my gaze, Serpent smiled softly and said, Why are you looking at me like that? I smiled faintly, nothing. I just suddenly think that I have a good eye for people. One pick, and I got a piece of trash. His eyes flickered slightly, and then he smiled too. He reached out and stroked my face. You're also very excellent. Aurora. You've worked hard all these years. Don't worry. I'll deal with Mom. I nodded. Using the excuse that I wasn't feeling well, I carried my daughter back to the room. After closing the door, I carefully examined my daughter. And after confirming that she hadn't been harmed in any way, I couldn't help but hold her and cry silently. With Mom around, there is a home. This time, even for the sake of my daughter, I have to live well. Just as I finished drafting the divorce agreement and was packing my things to leave here with my daughter, my phone vibrated a few times. I opened the message and saw that Venom had sent a video. There were no people visible in the video, and I could only tell that the shooting location was inside a car. On the dashboard in front of the car's windshield, there was Kuromi, which was my daughter's favorite. This was our car. The background was the sound of two people's lips and tongues entwined, and the car body was shaking up and down. Although I had already known about their affair, seeing such a scene still made me feel nauseous. Serpent. You really are a hypocrite. I silently tore up the divorce agreement and threw it into the trash bin. Losing a husband through death is fine. But getting a divorce is not. It's just a little over half a year. Isn't it? I can wait. When it was almost time for dinner, Serpent and Venom came back home one after another. Looking at him, I said with a half smile, "Classmate Venom went out to buy wine. Did Serpent also go to buy something?" Serpent remained calm and said, "I originally planned to go out and buy a pack of cigarettes. But just now, Mom called and said that no one here smokes." My mother-in-law was slightly taken aback. Obviously, having hostiled Wyadsai, she didn't know about this. But she quickly reacted and chose to shield her son. Yes. I told him to come back. No one here smokes. So why buy cigarettes? Since everyone is back, let's start having dinner. At the dinner table, Serpent was as gentle as ever. My daughter and I love eating shrimp, and he peeled them for both of us throughout the meal. As for Venom, when she saw this scene, her face visibly turned sour. But she wouldn't just sit there and do nothing. Soon, she started making small moves again. And my phone vibrated again at this moment. There was no doubt that the message was from Venom. It was a photo showing Venom taking off her shoes and making small moves under the table. The intention of provocation was obvious. I just stared at the phone and chuckled. This laugh immediately attracted everyone's attention. My mother-in-law even frowned and said, "We're having a meal. What are you laughing at?" I smiled and said, "It's nothing. I just heard a joke. A friend said that her colleague's husband had athlete's foot. And the colleague also said not to touch places that shouldn't be touched with his feet." What's going on? Why do I smell a stinky foot odor? My mother-in-law first frowned so tightly that it seemed she could crush a fly. And then she exclaimed in shock, "Foot odor? Could it be that someone took off their shoes?" 77 Venom immediately sat up straight. And even Serpent adjusted his sitting posture inadvertently. In short, both of their faces didn't look very good. As for the other relatives, they also looked under the table at this time. I watched this farce quietly, without showing any emotion. I knew that even if I presented the evidence at this moment, it wouldn't do me any good. Venom was pregnant. And my mother-in-law, who was eager to have a grandson, definitely wouldn't give up on her. And the people sitting around were all relatives on my husband's side. So of course they wouldn't take my side. I have to find my own way out of this situation. Unexpectedly, just after I went to the bathroom, my daughter was gone. She wasn't in the living room, the bedroom, or even the study. I had no choice but to ask my mother-in-law, who was watching TV nearby, for help. "Mom, have you seen Dawn?" "Where is Dawn?" My mother-in-law said impatiently. "Look at you making such a fuss. She just went out to buy something with Venom. Where else could she be?" Just then, the doorbell rang. I rushed to the door at once. When I opened the door, my daughter was standing in front of me. Seeing that Venom was with her, I pushed Venom away and hugged my daughter tightly. "Dawn, where have you been? Do you know how worried I was?" My daughter blinked her eyes, took Venom's hand with her little hand, and said, "I went out to play with Venom." "Look, Mom, Venom even bought me a toy. Seeing the plush toy in my daughter's hand, anger instantly filled my chest. I suppressed my anger and asked, Dawn, you already have so many toys. Do you still need this one? And didn't Mom tell you? Don't take things from strangers, I said. My daughter looked at me, then at Serpent and said, but Dad said that sister isn't a stranger. I was shocked again. Not a stranger? Then I took a deep breath and said, Dawn, listen to Mom. Give the plush toy back to her. And Mom will buy you a new one. Okay? After that, I was about to take the toy from my daughter's hand. Unexpectedly, my daughter took a step back and directly hid behind Serpent. Serpent seemed to be unable to bear it any longer. He picked up our daughter and shouted at me. Aurora, what kind of behavior is this? Our daughter is still here. I looked at my daughter. She seemed afraid that I would take away her toy and protected it tightly. At this moment, my daughter seemed so strange that it scared me. Her father betrayed me. Could it be that my daughter was the same? If that was the case, why on earth had I worked so hard and done so much? That night, as usual, my mother-in-law asked Venom to stay overnight at home. Just after I finished washing and went to bed, I received a message from Venom on my phone. Obviously, hadn't fulfilled why I'm sorry. You're the mistress of this house. It's a pity that whether it's your mother-in-law, husband, or daughter, they all like me. The one who isn't recognized is the redundant one. Why are you still clinging on and not leading? I just glanced at the message and then threw the phone aside, ignoring it. Unexpectedly, when I was about to lie down, my daughter's crying came from the living room. When my husband and I rushed out, we saw our daughter lying on the sofa, having difficulty breathing, with her hands covering her neck. There were red rashes all over her arms and face. Seeing our daughter's condition, Serpent exclaimed, allergic reaction? And he coldly questioned, Dawn is allergic to mangoes. Who gave her mangoes to eat? Venom, who was sitting beside my daughter, turned pale with fright. When Serpent asked, she quickly waved her hands and said, it wasn't me. I quickly opened the drawer, found the anti-allergy spray that we always kept at home, and sprayed it on my daughter. It was only half an hour later that my daughter came to her senses. In response to Serpent's question, my daughter burst into tears and said, it was Venom. I told her I'm allergic to mangoes. But Venom still asked me to try them. Venom, I like you and the little brother in your belly. Why did you want to hurt me? Venom hurriedly explained. Serpent, it wasn't me. But Serpent didn't believe a word she said and directly drove her out. After Venom left, my daughter hugged me and acted cockathiously. Mom is the best. Mom, I'm scared. Can I sleep with you tonight? Looking at my daughter's pleading little face, I finally softened my heart and nodded, then drove Serpent to the study. After Serpent left, my daughter finished washing and happily lay beside me, with her little face closely pressed against my arm. Mom, a classmate in our class said yesterday that his dad has cancer. Mom, what is cancer? I heard Dad say today that he also went for a medical checkup. The medical report will come out tomorrow. I really hope Dad is safe and sound. My hand holding my daughter paused slightly. According to what happened in my last life, Serpent was also diagnosed with cancer after I died. Could it be that it's tomorrow? Mom, I love you. Hearing my daughter's voice, I couldn't help but shed tears again. Then I hugged her tightly and choked up. Mom loves you too. Forever. Early the next morning, I took a taxi to the hospital. When I arrived at the hospital gate, I called Serpent and said, Dawn said you were coming to the hospital to get your medical report today. Coincidentally, I also have something to do at the hospital, so I'll get yours by the way. Serpent didn't hide his feelings and said, that's fine. The car was sent for repair yesterday, and it's inconvenient for me without a car. Then I'll trouble you. I replied, it's no trouble, and then hung up the phone. I used his ID card to print out the medical report that had already been released. In the column of the report results, it indeed said advanced cancer and other words. After the doctor learned that I was the patient's wife, he told me everything about Serpent's condition without reservation. Just as I had thought. Serpent had at most 3 months left to live. When I asked about the treatment method, I chose taking medicine and conservative treatment. When getting the medicine, I even wiped away a tear and begged the doctor to keep it a secret for me. Just because my husband was a university professor and cared a lot about his face. If he knew this result and was hit by it, he might not even be able to hold on for 3 months. Only after the doctor agreed to my request did I take the medicine and leave. However, as soon as I came out of the hospital, Serpent called again. He said he had a stomachache and asked if the hospital had prescribed any medicine. If it hadn't, I was convenient. He asked me to send the medicine to the school for him. Of course, I agreed. Moreover, I also bought several bottles of stomach medicine and antifoambanti medicine from the pharmacy, replaced the medicine prescribed by the hospital with them, and then sent it to him. After Serpent took the medicine, he got relief quickly. I knew that the medicine prescribed for advanced cancer contained more pain-relieving ingredients, and that was why it had such a remarkable effect. In the following days, I always acted cautiously. I chose the relatively safe subway as my means of transportation when going to and from work. Benham would still send photos from time to time to provoke me. In the end, she sent messages to force me to step down, saying that the baby in her belly was a boy and that my mother-in-law had gone with her to do the gender identification. For these messages, I still chose to read them but not reply. In my spare time, I would look at the surveillance footage installed at home. Serpent in the surveillance footage looked much thinner. Because of his physical discomfort, he took medicine more frequently, thinking that this man would disappear forever soon. I didn't feel sad at all. Time passed even faster than I had imagined. In the blink of an eye, more than 2 months had passed, and Serpent's health was getting worse and worse. Until one day, looking at himself in the mirror, skinny and emaciated, Serpent panicked. He said to me, "Aurora, I still feel something is wrong. My stomachache is getting more and more frequent, and I often feel weak. How about I go to the hospital for another checkup?" I agreed to his request. After all, I also wanted to know how long he could still live. Serpent's body was already very weak. After this examination, he directly leaned against the chair and fell asleep. While he was sound asleep, I went to get the test report. After the doctor looked at the report, he directly shook his head and said, "His condition is already in the final stage. Dying without pain is already a lucky thing. I'll prescribe some more painkillers for him. If 1 injection doesn't work, give him 2. The later it gets, the more injections he may need. As for you, you can start making arrangements for the aftermath." I nodded and pretended to cover my face and cry. Behind me, Serpent's trembling voice came. "Doctor, what did you say? Making arrangements for the aftermath?" The truth could no longer be hidden. I could only tell him the truth. When he learned that he had cancer and didn't have many days left to live, Serpent seemed to be falling apart. He trembled and said, "Doctor, how long do I have left?" The doctor sighed and said, "At most 10 days. Serpent slowly stood up, staggered a couple of steps, and finally fell to the ground. I didn't expect that when Serpent fell this time, he wouldn't be able to stand up again. In just 2 days, he looked extremely haggard. When he woke up, I told him another piece of bad news. "Honey, Mom-in-law has also passed away." "What?" He was severely shocked. His sunken eyes stared at me fixedly, and he choked up. "What happened?" I explained. "Because I was taking care of you. I wasn't at home these 2 days. Mom-in-law was alone at home. When I got back, she had already died of gas poisoning and couldn't be saved." Serpent couldn't hold back and spat out a mouthful of blood, then fainted again. When he woke up again, the aftermath of my mother-in-law's death had already been taken care of. And because of his illness and the pain of losing his mother, Serpent couldn't even speak. Looking at him staring at me, his mouth opening and closing as if he had something to say, I slowly moved closer to him and asked, "What do you want to say? Do you want to say that you still can trust us short about Benham and the baby in her belly?" Serpent looked at me. His eyes filled with shock. And I was unhurried. I took out my phone, flipped through the messages, and showed them to him one by one. What I flipped out was the news about a young professor at a well-known university having an affair When I clicked in, the parties involved were him and Venom. In addition, all the provocative messages that Venom sent to me, as well as the self-exposed photos, were all posted online. Venom and he became famous overnight. Many netizens and even his students were cursing them under the trending topic. I flipped through those comments cursing him and Venom one by one and read them to him. Finally, having so felt my website, I opened his social media account and let him see the overwhelming private messages abusing him. Finally, hadn't so felt my website, I clicked my tongue inside. Look at you. You're so pitiful. You're dying of cancer and still being cursed at. By the way, the school also issued a notice saying that you were just an externally hired teacher and fired you. You've always cared about your reputation all your life. Unfortunately, it will all be ruined in the end. Serpent stared at me intently, his expression pained, and his mouth opening and closing accordingly. I slowly leaned closer and only heard him say in a voice that only I could almost hear, "I'm sorry." I smiled and said, "Sorry? You're probably regretting that you didn't manage to cover it up perfectly. It's a pity. It's too late." As soon as I finished speaking, the door of the ward was suddenly slammed open. Venom, with a big belly, tried to rush in but was stopped by the bodyguards at the door. Helplessly, she could only roar at me, "Aurora, I'm carrying Serpent's child. Why didn't you tell me he was sick, child?" I glanced at her belly and said, "Do you think just because you slept with him, the bastard in your belly is his? Do you have any evidence? What if it's another man's?" Venom was unconvinced and continued to shout loudly, "Serpent, hurry up and tell her that the child in my belly is yours. Serpent, hold on a little longer. When the child is born, can you take a look at him? If not, I'll go to the hospital and make an appointment today to have the child delivered by cesarean section." But at this moment, I shouted at the bodyguards, "Where did this crazy woman come from? Doctor her away quickly." After the bodyguard drove Venom away, I looked at Serpent again and said, "Seeing her reminds me that there's actually one more thing I need to tell you. Actually, hadn't fulfilled my obsession. Your mother could have been saved that day. It's a pity that after Venom went there, she went out again." Then I played for him the surveillance footage I had downloaded on my phone. In the footage, after Venom entered the room and saw my mother-in-law lying on the floor unable to get up, she seemed to realize something and was about to go in, but stopped when she was about to take a step. Then she closed the door again and left. After Venom left, my mother-in-law, who was lying on the floor, started foaming at the mouth and twitching all over. In the end, she stopped breathing. I said, "Do you know why Venom didn't save your mother? Because she also knew that your mother was very difficult to deal with and didn't want to live with such a difficult mother-in-law like your mother after she managed to climb to the top." Serpent stared at me intently. The gaunt look on his face made him no longer resemble the gentle and refined man he used to be. I frowned in disgust and said, "Don't look at me like that. It's so disgusting." Eventually, he couldn't bear it any longer. He stretched out his legs and finally died. After Serpent died, I quickly got the death certificate, received the compensation from the insurance company, and then had his body cremated. By the time Venom learned the news of Serpent's death, it was already too late. At that time, she came to argue with me while holding her big belly, claiming that even though Serpent was dead, the inheritance should include a share for the child in her womb. According to the new marriage law, even children born out of wedlock have the right to inheritance. I looked at Venom and smiled. The right to inheritance? Serpent's remains have already been cremated. What evidence do you have to prove that the child in your belly is his? Venom looked at me in disbelief and said, "It's you. It's all you're doing. Aurora. You planned all of this. Didn't you? And your daughter. You instigated her. Didn't you?" I looked at her, smiling but saying nothing. Venom was furious and staggered to steps while clutching her belly. I pointed at the surveillance camera above and said, "There's a camera here. Don't try to frame me." Venom was angry but had no choice. She could only leave in a huff. After handling Serpent's property, I also resigned from my job. After that, I sold the house, took the money, and left the city with my daughter. On the night of the day we moved into the new house, I had a dream. In the dream, just like in my previous life, I died in a car accident. My daughter cried heartbrokenly and ran in front of the Bodhisattva enshrined by my mother-in-law, kowtowing and praying over and over again. Please, Bodhisattva, give my mother back to me. Woo woo woo. Please. Then my daughter went to our new home and knocked on the door. After that, Venom coaxed my daughter into jumping off the building. At that moment, my daughter heard a voice. Do you really want your mother to come back to life? Even if it means sacrificing your own life? I heard my daughter say softly. I do. Then she jumped out of the window of the bathroom. So it was her. I woke up from the dream with a start. Looking at my daughter who was still sleeping soundly beside me, I pinched myself hard. The real feeling of pain made me realize that this wasn't a dream. My daughter was still by my side, and I was still alive. I gently hugged my daughter and kissed her face again and again. Baby, Mom loves you. My daughter, who was half asleep, also reached out and hugged me. Mom, I love you too. Forever and ever. The end.